The blood on Lena Zimmerman's hands had long since dried by the time she stumbled into Hot Springs, South Dakota, on a blistering August afternoon in 1882. Her father's wagon creaking behind the exhausted mare that barely had strength left to pull it. She had wrapped her father's body in every blanket they owned 3 days ago when the fever finally took him somewhere in the Badlands. And now, the August sun beat down mercilessly on the canvas covering, and she tried not to think about what was happening underneath. The town materialized like a mirage through the heat shimmer, buildings wavering in the scorching air, and Lena's cracked lips moved in a silent prayer of gratitude, even as her pride refused to let her ask the first person she saw where the undertaker might be found. She pulled the wagon down the main street, aware of eyes following her progress, aware of how she must look with her dark hair matted with dust and her dress stained with travel and sickness and death. A few people paused in their daily routines to stare, but Lena kept her chin up and her gaze forward, searching the storefronts for any indication of where she needed to go. Her father had always said she was too stubborn for her own good, that her refusal to accept help would be her downfall someday. The irony of those words now, with him lying dead in the wagon behind her, was not lost on Lena. She finally spotted a sign that read "Mortuary and Undertaking Services" near the edge of town, and guided the exhausted horse in that direction. The building was modest but well-maintained, painted white with black trim that seemed appropriate for its somber purpose. Lena climbed down from the wagon seat, her legs nearly giving out beneath her after 3 days of almost constant travel. She had to grab the wheel to steady herself, and she stood there for a moment, gathering what remained of her strength. The door to the mortuary opened, and a thin man with spectacles emerged, taking in the scene with professional assessment. "Miss, do you need assistance?" "I need to arrange a burial," Lena said, her voice hoarse from disuse and dehydration. "My father. He passed 3 days ago." The undertaker nodded with practiced sympathy. "Of course. Let me help you with, I can manage," Lena interrupted, though she swayed slightly as she said it. "Just tell me the cost and where the cemetery is located." The man quoted a price that made Lena's heart sink. She had money, but not much, and she still needed to figure out what she was going to do next, where she was going to go. Her father had been bringing them west with dreams of starting fresh in the Montana Territory, but those dreams had died with him somewhere in the unforgiving landscape they had been crossing. "I will need a day to gather the funds," Lena said, which was a lie. She had the money, but she needed time to think, to plan, to figure out her next move without anyone watching her or offering help she was too proud to accept. "Miss, your father should not remain in this heat much longer," the undertaker said gently. "Perhaps we could arrange one day," Lena repeated firmly. "I will return tomorrow with payment." She climbed back onto the wagon before the man could argue further and guided the horse down the street. Her eyes scanned for a livery stable, and she found one at the opposite end of town, a large barn with a corral attached. A young boy was mucking out stalls, and he looked up as Lena approached. "I need to stable my horse," she said, "and I need space for my wagon." The boy wiped his forehead with his sleeve. "That will be 50 cents a day, miss. Food and water included for the horse." Lena nodded and climbed down again, this time managing to stay steady on her feet. She began unhitching the mare, her fingers clumsy with exhaustion. The boy watched her for a moment, then started to move forward as if to help. "I have it," Lena said sharply, not looking at him. The boy retreated, and Lena continued her work, even though her hands were shaking and her vision kept blurring at the edges. She got the mare free from the traces and led her into the barn, the boy directing her to an empty stall. The horse immediately went for the water trough, drinking deeply, and Lena felt a pang of guilt that she had pushed the animal so hard. "The wagon can stay in the back lot," the boy said. "But miss, if there's anything perishable in there, this heat—" "I am aware of the heat," Lena said. "Thank you." She paid the boy for 2 days, which left her funds even more depleted, and then she stood in the barn trying to decide what to do next. She needed food, water, and a place to sleep. But more than that, she needed to be alone, to grieve without an audience, to figure out how a 22-year-old woman with no family and limited funds was going to survive in a world that was not kind to women in her position. The barn was dim and relatively cool compared to the blazing street outside. Lena looked at the ladder leading up to the hayloft and made a decision. She climbed up, her skirts hampering her progress, and found a corner behind several bales of hay. It was dusty and smelled of dried grass and horse, but it was private. She sank down onto the hay and finally, allowed herself to stop moving. The tears came then, hot and bitter, and Lena pressed her hands to her face to muffle the sound. She cried for her father, for the future they would not have, for the loneliness that stretched before her like the endless prairie. She cried until she had no tears left, and then she simply sat there, staring at nothing, her mind blank with grief and exhaustion. She must have fallen asleep, because when she opened her eyes again, the light coming through the gaps in the barn walls had changed, going from bright afternoon to the softer gold of evening. Lena's throat was painfully dry, and her stomach cramped with hunger. She had not eaten since yesterday morning, had barely drunk any water. She knew she needed to take care of herself, but the effort seemed monumental. She climbed down from the loft, her body protesting every movement. The boy was gone, presumably finished with his work for the day. Lena walked out into the evening air and looked up and down the street. She needed to find a well or a pump, needed to find somewhere to buy food. But asking for directions meant interacting with people, meant risking questions she did not want to answer or pity she did not want to see. She started walking, figuring she could find what she needed on her own. Hot Springs was not a large town. The main street had maybe 20 buildings total, a mix of businesses and homes. Lena passed a general store, a saloon, a restaurant, a dress shop, a blacksmith, and various other establishments. She finally spotted a public pump in a small square between buildings and headed for it. The water was cool and tasted faintly of minerals, and Lena drank until her stomach sloshed uncomfortably. She splashed water on her face and the back of her neck, washing away some of the dust and grime. She was aware that she was being watched by a few people who were out enjoying the cooling evening air, but she ignored them, her pride forming a protective shell around her vulnerability. When she had drunk her fill, Lena headed for the general store. It was still open, lamp light glowing in the windows. She pushed through the door, a bell jingling above her head, and found herself in a well-stocked establishment that smelled of coffee and spices and new fabric. A woman stood behind the counter, middle-aged and pleasant-faced, and she smiled at Lena. "Good evening, dear. What can I help you find?" "Bread if you have it," Lena said, "and cheese, some dried meat if possible, of course." The woman began gathering the items. "You are new in town." "Just passing through," Lena said, which was not exactly true but not exactly a lie either. She did not know yet if she would stay or keep moving. "Well, welcome to Hot Springs. My name is Margaret. My husband and I run this store. If you need anything during your stay, you just come see us." "Thank you," Lena said, taking the wrapped food items and paying for them. She turned to leave, but Margaret's voice stopped her. "Dear, if you need a place to stay, the boarding house is just 2 buildings down. Mrs. Patterson runs it, and she is very reasonable with her rates." Lena nodded but did not commit to anything. She left the store and stood on the boardwalk, holding her food, trying to decide if she should spend the money on a room or save it and sleep in the hayloft again. The practical part of her knew she needed a proper rest, maybe a bath, but the stubborn part insisted she could manage without such luxuries. She was still standing there, lost in indecision, when she became aware of someone watching her. Lena turned her head and saw a man leaning against a post outside the saloon across the street. He was tall, lean in the way men who worked hard physically were lean, with dark hair that needed cutting and several days' worth of beard shadowing his jaw. He wore typical cowboy attire: worn jeans, scuffed boots, a faded blue shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and a hat pushed back on his head. He was not staring at her rudely, just looking with a kind of quiet assessment that made Lena uncomfortable. She turned away deliberately and started walking back toward the livery. She would sleep in the hayloft again. It was fine. She had slept in worse places during the journey west. She ate the bread and cheese as she walked, her body crying out for the sustenance, and by the time she reached the barn she felt marginally more human. The livery was dark now, everyone gone for the night. Lena slipped inside and climbed back up to her corner in the loft. She made a bed of hay, using her shawl as a pillow, and lay down. Through the gaps in the walls, she could see stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Her father had loved the stars, had often pointed out constellations during their journey. The memory brought fresh tears, but Lena was too exhausted to cry properly. She closed her eyes and let sleep take her. She woke before dawn, stiff and aching, bits of hay stuck in her hair and clothes. The barn was still dark, the horses below shifting and snorting in their stalls. Lena sat up and tried to work the kinks out of her neck and shoulders. She needed to go back to the undertaker today, needed to lay her father to rest. The thought made her chest tighten, but she pushed through it. This had to be done. She climbed down from the loft and slipped out of the barn into the pre-dawn darkness. The town was quiet, most people still asleep. Lena walked to the pump and washed as best she could, trying to make herself presentable. Her dress was wrinkled and stained, her hair a tangled mess, but there was only so much she could do about her appearance without access to proper facilities. As the sun began to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, Lena walked to the mortuary. The undertaker was not there yet, so she sat on the step and waited, eating the last of her bread. She watched the town wake up, people emerging from homes and boarding houses, businesses opening their doors. Hot Springs was a small town but seemed prosperous, likely due to the natural warm springs that gave it its name. Lena had heard about the springs. New people came from far away to bathe in the mineral waters, believing them to have healing properties. The undertaker arrived as the sun cleared the horizon, looking surprised to find Lena waiting. "Miss Zimmerman, good morning. I did not expect you quite so early." "I want to get this done," Lena said, standing up. "The sooner the better, of course. Do you have the payment?" Lena handed him the money, watching her funds dwindle to almost nothing. "When can the burial take place?" "This afternoon, if that suits you. Say 2 o'clock. That will give me time to prepare everything properly." Lena nodded. "Where is the cemetery?" The undertaker gave her directions to a plot of land on a hill overlooking the town. "Will anyone else be attending? Perhaps you would like me to notify the minister." "No," Lena said quickly, "just me. And I do not need a minister." The undertaker looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Lena's expression stopped him. "As you wish. I will have everything ready at 2. Lena left and walked aimlessly through the town, killing time until the afternoon. She had no purpose now, no direction. Her father's dream of Montana had died with him, and she had no other dreams to replace it. She supposed she could try to find work, could stay in hot springs and make a life here. She had no skills beyond basic cooking and sewing, nothing that would command good wages. She could maybe find work as a maid or laundress, could scrape by on the margins of society as so many women in her position did. The thought depressed her, but Lena did not know what else to do. She had no family to return to back east, no friends who could take her in. She was alone in a way that felt absolute and terrifying. She found herself near the livery stable again and decided to check on the wagon. She walked around to the back lot where it sat in the sun, and her steps faltered. Someone had been here. The canvas covering her father's body had been rearranged, tied more securely. And when Lena looked closer, she saw that someone had packed straw around the base of the wagon, presumably to help with the smell and to keep scavengers away. Lena looked around, but there was no one nearby. The boy who worked here. But why would he do this without asking, without being paid? She felt a flutter of something in her chest, gratitude mixed with unease. She had not asked for help. She did not want charity. But as the day grew hotter and Lena realized how much worse things could have been without this intervention, she could not quite maintain her indignation. Someone had seen a need and met it without making a fuss, without demanding recognition. It was a kindness she had not expected. The hours crawled by. Lena bought more food from the general store, avoiding Margaret's friendly attempts at conversation. She drank water from the pump. She sat in what little shade she could find and watched the town go about its business, and at 2 o'clock she walked to the cemetery alone. The undertaker had done his job well. Her father's body had been placed in a simple pine coffin, the grave already dug in a far corner of the cemetery. The minister was there despite Lena's wishes, but he kept his words brief when he saw her expression. They lowered the coffin into the ground, and Lena stood there dry-eyed, watching the man who had raised her disappear into the earth. When it was done, when the dirt had been shoveled back into the hole and the minister had left, Lena remained. She stood at the grave, trying to find words to say, but her mind was empty. Finally, she whispered, "I am sorry, Papa. I am sorry I could not save you. I am sorry your dreams died out here." The wind picked up, blowing dust across the cemetery, and Lena turned away. She walked back down the hill toward town, feeling hollowed out, like something essential had been scraped from inside her. She did not know where she was going or what she was doing. She just walked. She ended up back at the livery, climbing up to her corner in the hayloft. She lay down in the hay and stared at the ceiling, watching dust motes drift in the shafts of sunlight coming through the gaps. She should be making plans, figuring out her next move, but she could not seem to make her mind work properly. Everything felt distant and unreal. As evening approached, Lena became aware of sounds from below. The boy had returned and was tending to the horses. She heard him talking to someone, though she could not make out the words. Then footsteps on the ladder, and Lena tensed, ready to defend her space. But it was not the boy who appeared at the top of the ladder. It was the man she had seen outside the saloon yesterday, the cowboy with the watchful eyes. He did not seem surprised to find her there, which made Lena wonder if the boy had told him. He stood at the top of the ladder, not climbing fully into the loft, and for a long moment they just looked at each other. Lena waited for him to speak, to ask what she was doing here or to tell her she needed to leave. But he said nothing. He simply reached into his pocket and pulled out something wrapped in cloth, setting it on the floor of the loft within her reach. Then he nodded once and disappeared back down the ladder. Lena stared at the bundle for several minutes before curiosity overcame caution. She crawled forward and unwrapped it, finding fresh bread, cheese, an apple, and several strips of jerky. Underneath the food was a small canteen full of water. Lena's hands shook as she held the items. She should be angry. She should march down there and tell him she did not need his charity, did not want his pity. But the food smelled so good, and she was so hungry, and the gesture had been done without words or expectation of gratitude. He had not waited for thanks. He had simply left. She ate slowly, savoring each bite, and wondered about the silent cowboy. Who was he? Why was he helping her? What did he want in return? Lena's experience with men had taught her that they always wanted something, even if they did not say so upfront. But as the days passed, the cowboy continued his wordless assistance without asking for anything. Lena did not leave Hot Springs. She told herself it was because she was too tired to move on, because the horse needed rest, because she needed time to grieve. But really, it was because she did not know where else to go. She continued sleeping in the hayloft, and every evening the cowboy would appear at the top of the ladder with food. He never spoke. He would just set down whatever he had brought, nod, and leave. Lena never thanked him, her pride still holding strong, but she ate what he brought, and slowly her strength began to return. She learned his name from the boy at the livery, who was named Tommy and who had grown comfortable with her presence in the loft. "That is Isaac Parker," Tommy said when Lena finally asked. "He works at the ranch outside town, comes into Hot Springs every few days for supplies. He is a good man, miss, quiet but good." Isaac Parker. Lena repeated the name in her mind, putting it to the silent cowboy's face. She wondered what had made him decide to help her, wondered if he did this for everyone, or if there was something specific about her situation that had moved him. She saw him around town occasionally. He would be loading supplies into a wagon or talking to the blacksmith or having a drink at the saloon. He never approached her during the day, never acknowledged her beyond a slight nod if their paths crossed. But every evening he would climb partway up the ladder to the hayloft and leave food. After a week, Lena decided she needed to find work. She could not live in the hayloft forever, could not keep accepting charity from a stranger. She went to the boarding house and asked Mrs. Patterson if she needed help with anything. The older woman looked her up and down, taking in her worn dress and tired eyes. "Can you cook?" Mrs. Patterson asked. "Yes, madam, and clean. I can do laundry and mending as well. I could use help with breakfast and cleaning the rooms. I can offer you room and board plus a small wage. Does that interest you?" It was not much, but it was something. Lena accepted, and Mrs. Patterson showed her to a tiny room on the third floor, barely big enough for the narrow bed and small dresser it contained. But it had a real bed and a window and a door that closed, and after a week in the hayloft, it felt like luxury. That evening, Lena gathered her few belongings from the livery and told Tommy she would not be staying in the loft anymore. "Thank you for not telling anyone I was here," she said. "You needed a place," Tommy said with a shrug. "It did not hurt nothing." Lena hesitated, then asked, "Will you tell Mr. Parker that I have moved to the boarding house, so he does not keep bringing food to the loft?" Tommy nodded. "I will tell him." Lena expected that to be the end of it. She had found work and a place to stay. She was managing on her own, just as she had wanted. But 2 days after she moved into the boarding house, she came back to her room after a long day of cooking and cleaning to find a package on her bed. Inside was fabric, several yards of dark blue cotton suitable for making a dress, along with thread and needles. Lena's first instinct was to march to the ranch where Isaac worked and throw the package at him, to tell him to stop, that she did not need his help. But she looked at her current dress, stained and worn thin from hard use, and she knew she did need a new one. Mrs. Patterson had been too polite to say anything, but Lena had seen the way she looked at the dress, had seen the concern in her eyes, so Lena kept the fabric. She spent her evenings over the next week sewing a new dress. her stitches small and neat despite her frustration. She told herself she would repay Isaac somehow, would find a way to give him back the value of what he had spent on her. The new dress was finished on a Sunday, and Lena put it on, feeling more like herself than she had in weeks. The fabric was soft and the fit was good, and when she looked in the small mirror in her room, she saw not a desperate woman fleeing tragedy, but someone who might have a future. She saw Isaac that afternoon when she walked to the general store for Mrs. Patterson. He was coming out of the saloon, and their eyes met across the dusty street. Lena stopped, intending to cross over and speak to him, to acknowledge what he had done. But before she could move, Isaac tipped his hat to her, a ghost of a smile crossing his face as he noticed the new dress. Then he turned and walked away, and the moment was gone. Lena stood there, frustrated by his continued silence, curious about this man who helped without expectation, drawn to him in a way she did not quite understand. She had built her life on independence, on not needing anyone. But Isaac's quiet assistance had slipped past her defenses precisely because he never demanded anything in return, never made her feel weak or incapable. Summer faded into autumn, and Lena settled into a routine at the boarding house. She was good at her work, efficient and thorough, and Mrs. Patterson began to rely on her more and more. The other residents were kind, mostly traveling salesmen and a few permanent boarders who worked in town. Lena kept to herself, polite but distant, and if anyone wondered about her story, they were too tactful to ask directly. Isaac continued his wordless assistance, though the nature of it evolved. One day, Lena found that her horse, which she had kept at the livery even after moving out of the loft, had been shod, the bill already paid. Another time, a cord of firewood appeared behind the boarding house with no note or explanation, though Lena knew without asking who had arranged it. Each act of kindness chipped away at Lena's armor, made her defenses feel less necessary. She began to watch for Isaac when she walked through town, began to feel a flutter in her chest when she spotted him. He was handsome in a quiet, unassuming way, with strong hands and kind eyes. She noticed the respectful way he treated everyone he encountered, noticed that he worked hard and did not drink to excess, or gamble, or engage in the other vices that plagued many cowboys. She wanted to talk to him, to understand him, but she did not know how to bridge the silence that had defined their entire relationship. How did you start a conversation with someone you had never spoken to, despite months of interaction? The answer came in October, when Mrs. Patterson fell ill with a bad cold. The older woman tried to keep working, but Lena insisted she stay in bed and rest. "I can manage the boarding house for a few days," Lena said firmly. "You have taught me everything I need to know." Mrs. Patterson, too exhausted to argue, agreed. Lena found herself running the entire operation, cooking all the meals, cleaning all the rooms, managing the books and the guests. It was exhausting work, but she took pride in doing it well. The boarding house ran smoothly, the guests were happy, and Mrs. Patterson was able to rest and recover. On the third day of this arrangement, Lena was in the kitchen preparing dinner when one of the guests came in looking worried. "Miss Zimmerman, there is a problem with the stove in the common room. It is smoking badly." Lena wiped her hands and went to investigate. The pot-bellied stove that heated the common room was indeed producing concerning amounts of smoke, and when Lena opened it, she could see that something was wrong with the flue. She did not know enough about stoves to fix it herself, and she did not want to bother Mrs. Patterson with this problem. The logical solution was to ask someone for help, but Lena's stubborn pride reared up. She could figure this out. She did not need to ask anyone. She spent an hour trying to diagnose and fix the problem herself, getting covered in soot, making no progress and filling the common room with even more smoke. Finally, frustrated and on the verge of tears, Lena admitted defeat. She would have to find someone who knew about stoves. The blacksmith might be able to help, or maybe the general store would know someone. She cleaned the soot from her hands and face as best she could and headed for the door. But when she opened it, Isaac was standing on the porch, his hand raised as if he had been about to knock. They stared at each other for a moment, and Lena saw him take in her disheveled appearance and the smoke drifting out the door behind her. Without a word, Isaac stepped past her and walked to the common room. He assessed the smoking stove, grabbed the tools from the box beside it, and went to work. Lena stood in the doorway and watched him, marveling at the efficiency of his movements, the competence he displayed. Within 20 minutes, he had the stove fixed and the flue drawing properly. He cleaned his hands on a rag, then turned to face her. They stood there in the smoke-hazed room, and for the first time in the months since they had met, Lena felt like something needed to be said. Her pride had kept her silent for so long, but watching Isaac fix her problem without being asked, without expectation of thanks or payment, something shifted inside her. "Why do you keep helping me?" The words came out barely above a whisper, but in the quiet room they sounded loud. Isaac looked at her for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and rough, as if from disuse. "Because you needed help, and because you would not ask for it. You do not even know me. I know enough." He took a step closer, and Lena's breath caught. "I know you are stubborn and proud. I know you would rather struggle alone than accept a hand up. I know you buried your father by yourself and slept in a hayloft because asking for help felt like weakness. How do you know all that? Because I have been watching you. Because I saw you that first day, saw the way you held yourself together when most people would have fallen apart. Because I see myself in you, I guess. The stubborn refusal to depend on anyone." Lena felt her carefully constructed walls crumbling. "I do not understand why that would make you want to help." Isaac smiled, a real smile this time, not just a ghost of one. "Maybe because I wish someone had helped me when I needed it most. Maybe because I admire your strength even while I worry about it. Maybe because I have not been able to stop thinking about you since the day you drove into town." The confession hung in the air between them. Lena's heart was pounding, her mind racing. She had been so focused on maintaining her independence, on not needing anyone, that she had not let herself consider that maybe she did not have to be alone. That accepting help was not the same as being weak. That allowing someone into her life might not be a burden but a gift. "I do not know how to do this," she admitted. "I do not know how to let someone help me." "You are doing it right now," Isaac said gently. "You are letting me help with the stove. That is a start. I tried to fix it myself first. I know, I would have expected nothing less." He moved closer still, close enough that Lena could smell the clean scent of soap and horse and leather that clung to him. "Lena, I am not trying to take over your life or make you dependent on me. I just want to help when I can. And maybe, if you are willing, I would like to get to know you better. Not as someone who needs saving, but as a person. As a woman I find fascinating and strong and beautiful." Lena felt heat rise in her cheeks. No one had ever called her beautiful before, and certainly not in a voice that made her believe they meant it. "I find you confusing," she said, and then laughed at how ridiculous that sounded. "I mean, I do not understand you. How can you be so patient? How can you help without expecting anything back?" "Who says I do not expect anything back?" Isaac's eyes were warm, almost teasing. "I expect plenty. I expect that maybe someday you will smile at me without looking suspicious. I expect that maybe you will let me take you to dinner at the restaurant. I expect that maybe, eventually, you will let yourself care about someone again." That is a lot of expectations, Lena said, but she was smiling despite herself. I am a patient man. I can wait. Mrs. Patterson's voice called from upstairs, asking if everything was all right with the stove. Lena called back that it was fixed, then turned back to Isaac. Would you like to stay for dinner? It is the least I can do after you fix the stove. I would like that, Isaac said, and so began the slow, careful process of two guarded people learning to trust each other. Isaac stayed for dinner that night, sitting at the kitchen table while Lena cooked, and they talked. Really talked for the first time. Isaac told her about growing up on a farm in Missouri, about losing his parents to cholera when he was 16, about making his way west and finding work on ranches because he was good with horses. Lena told him about her childhood in Pennsylvania, about her mother dying when she was young, about the years of just her and her father, about his dream of Montana, and how that dream had died in the Badlands. She cried while telling it, the first time she had really cried since the funeral, and Isaac simply listened, his presence steady and comforting. When dinner was served and the boarders had been fed, Isaac helped her clean up the kitchen. They worked in comfortable silence, falling into an easy rhythm, and when everything was done, Isaac put on his hat and prepared to leave. "Thank you for dinner," he said, "and for talking to me." "Thank you for fixing the stove," Lena replied, "and for everything else. All the help you have given me, even when I was too stubborn to acknowledge it. You are welcome." Isaac hesitated at the door. "Lena, would you let me take you to the restaurant next Sunday? After church, maybe." Lena wanted to say yes immediately, but old habits died hard. "I do not go to church. Neither do I usually, but maybe we could both go just this once, and then have dinner after." "Why church?" "Because I want to court you properly," Isaac said seriously. "I want everyone in this town to know I am serious about you. I want to do this right." Lena felt something warm bloom in her chest. All right. Sunday, church and dinner. Isaac's smile was worth every bit of pride she had swallowed. He tipped his hat to her and left, and Lena stood at the door watching him walk down the street until he disappeared into the darkness. Mrs. Patterson recovered over the next few days, full of praise for how well Lena had managed everything. When Lena mentioned that Isaac had fixed the stove and stayed for dinner, the older woman gave her a knowing look. "Isaac Parker is a good man," Mrs. Patterson said. "Hard-working, honest, respectful. Any woman would be lucky to have his attention." "I am not sure I am ready for this," Lena admitted. "Ready for what? To be happy. To have someone in your life who cares about you." Mrs. Patterson shook her head. "My dear, we are never ready for the good things. They just happen, and we either accept them or spend our lives regretting what we pushed away." Sunday arrived, and Lena dressed carefully in her blue dress, fixing her hair in a way she hoped looked nice. She met Isaac outside the church, and together they walked in, very aware of the curious looks they received. Hot Springs was a small town, and everyone knew everyone else's business. By tomorrow, the whole town would know that Isaac Parker was courting Lena Zimmerman. The service was fine, the minister giving a sermon about grace and forgiveness that actually seemed relevant to Lena's life. Sitting beside Isaac in the pew, their arms occasionally brushing, Lena felt something she had not felt in a long time: peace. Not the absence of struggle, but the presence of hope. After church, they walked to the restaurant, and Isaac held the door for her. The meal was simple but delicious, and they talked easily, continuing the conversation they had started in Mrs. Patterson's kitchen. Isaac was funny in a dry, understated way. He asked thoughtful questions and listened carefully to her answers. He told her about the ranch where he worked, about his hopes of someday having his own place, about the land he had been saving money to buy. "It is not much," he said. Just a small spread on the creek about 5 miles from town. But the land is good and there is water year-round. I could run cattle, maybe raise horses. Build a real life." "That sounds wonderful," Lena said and meant it. "It would be lonely, though. A ranch is a lot of work for one person." Isaac looked at her meaningfully. "It would be better with a partner." Lena felt her face heat. "Isaac Parker, are you proposing to me on our first official outing?" "No," Isaac said, laughing. "I am just saying that I am thinking long-term. I want you to know my intentions are serious. I am not looking for a casual flirtation. I am looking for someone to build a life with. That is quite forward. I have never been good at playing games. I would rather be honest." Lena appreciated that. She had had enough of uncertainty and unclear expectations in her life. "I appreciate your honesty. And I will be honest in return. I like you, Isaac. I have liked you since you first started leaving food in the hayloft, even though I was too proud to admit it. But I am scared. I have lost everyone I have ever cared about. My mother, my father. The thought of caring about you and then losing you too is terrifying." Isaac reached across the table and took her hand, the first time they had really touched. His hand was warm and calloused and strong. "I cannot promise I will never die," he said quietly. "But I can promise I will do my best to live well and take care of you. And I can promise that however much time we have, I will make it count." Tears pricked Lena's eyes, but they were not sad tears. "That is all anyone can promise, I suppose. So you will let me court you, properly?" "Yes," Lena said. "I will let you court me." The courtship progressed over the following months. Isaac came to town every Sunday and they would attend church together and then have dinner. Sometimes they would walk after dinner, wandering the streets of Hot Springs and talking about everything and nothing. Sometimes they would sit on the porch of the boarding house, Lena mending or knitting while Isaac whittled, comfortable in each other's presence. Isaac never pushed for more than Lena was ready to give. He did not try to kiss her until they had been courting for 6 weeks, and even then, he asked permission first. They were standing on the boarding house porch at sunset, the sky painted in brilliant oranges and purples, and Isaac cupped her face gently in his hands. "May I kiss you?" he asked. Lena nodded, not trusting her voice, and Isaac leaned in slowly, giving her time to change her mind. When his lips met hers, soft and warm, Lena felt something settle inside her, like a piece of herself she had not known was missing had suddenly clicked into place. When they pulled apart, Isaac was smiling. "I have wanted to do that for months." "I wish you had done it sooner," Lena said, and pulled him back down for another kiss. Winter came to South Dakota with bitter cold and heavy snow. The work at the boarding house became more challenging, with frozen pipes and constant fire maintenance and guests tracking in mud and slush. But Lena found herself happier than she had been in years. She had work she was good at, a place she could call home, and a man who loved her, even if he had not said the words yet. Isaac could not come to town as often during the winter. The ranch work was demanding, and the weather made travel difficult. But he came when he could, sometimes riding through snowstorms to spend a few hours with Lena. She scolded him for taking such risks, but secretly, she was touched by his dedication. On Christmas Eve, Isaac arrived at the boarding house with a package wrapped in brown paper. "I have something for you," he said, his cheeks red from cold. Lena opened the package to find a beautiful wool shawl, deep green with intricate patterns woven into the fabric. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever owned. "Isaac, this is too much." "It is not enough," he said seriously. "Lena, I love you. I have loved you since I saw you drive into town last summer, so proud and stubborn and strong. I love the way you refuse to give up, the way you have built a life here against all odds. I love your kindness and your strength and your smile. I love everything about you. Lena's eyes filled with tears. "I love you too. I have been too scared to say it, too scared to admit how much you mean to me. But I do love you, Isaac, so much." He kissed her then, deep and sweet, and Lena felt like she was finally, truly home. "I want to marry you," Isaac said when they finally pulled apart. "I want you to be my wife. I want to build that ranch with you, raise children with you, grow old with you. Will you marry me, Lena?" "Yes," Lena said without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you." They decided to wait until spring for the wedding, to give Isaac time to finalize the purchase of his land and start building a house. Those months were a flurry of planning and preparation. Lena sewed her wedding dress with help from Mrs. Patterson, using white fabric that Isaac bought for her. She gave notice at the boarding house, though Mrs. Patterson insisted she stay on until the wedding. Isaac worked like a man possessed, spending every spare moment on his new land. He hired help to speed up the building process, and by April, a small but sturdy house stood on the property, along with a barn and corral. It was not fancy, but it was well built and it was theirs. They were married on a bright Sunday in May, exactly 1 year after Lena had driven into Hot Springs. The church was full of townspeople who had come to know and care for both of them over the past months. Margaret from the general store cried during the ceremony. Tommy from the livery looked proud, as if he had somehow been responsible for their happiness. Mrs. Patterson beamed like she was watching her own daughter get married. Lena wore her white dress and the green shawl Isaac had given her at Christmas. Isaac wore a new suit, stiff and formal, looking handsome and nervous. When the minister pronounced them man and wife, Isaac kissed her in front of everyone, and the church erupted in applause. The reception was held at the restaurant, with food and music and dancing. Lena danced with her new husband, marveling at how her life had changed. A year ago, she had been alone and grieving, stubborn in her refusal to ask for help. Now she was married to a good man who loved her, with a home and a future stretching before her. "What are you thinking?" Isaac asked as they swayed to the music. "I am thinking about the first time I saw you," Lena said. "Outside the saloon watching me, I thought you were nosy." Isaac laughed. "I was concerned. You looked like you were going to fall over at any moment. I was too proud to admit I needed help." "I know. That is why I helped without being asked. I knew you would refuse if I offered directly. You are a smart man, Isaac Parker. Smart enough to fall in love with you." They moved into their ranch the next day, and Lena threw herself into making it a real home. She planted a garden, sewed curtains for the windows, arranged their simple furniture to make the small house feel cozy. Isaac worked the land, building up a small herd of cattle and breaking horses to sell. The work was hard, the hours long, but they were building something together, and that made all the difference. Their first summer passed in a blur of work and learning. Lena had never run a ranch before, but she proved capable and adaptable. She learned to handle horses, to help with the cattle, to manage the household budget, to preserve food for winter. Isaac was patient with her mistakes and generous with his praise, and together they found a rhythm. When autumn came again, bringing cooler weather and changing leaves, Lena realized she had missed her monthly cycle. At first, she thought it was just stress or the physical demands of ranch life, but when she missed a second month, she knew. She was pregnant. She told Isaac one evening as they sat on their porch watching the sunset. "I am going to have a baby," she said simply. Isaac turned to stare at her, his eyes wide. "A baby? Are you sure?" "I am sure." He let out a whoop of joy and swept her up in his arms, spinning her around until she laughed and begged him to put her down. "We are going to have a baby," he kept saying, like he could not quite believe it. "We are going to be parents." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though Lena found the physical demands challenging at times. Isaac was attentive and protective, sometimes overly so, insisting she rest more and work less. Lena chafed at the restrictions but understood they came from love. Their son was born in early June, during a thunderstorm that rattled the windows and made the world feel wild and alive. The birth was hard, attended by Mrs. Patterson and the doctor from town, and there were moments when Lena wondered if she would survive. But when they placed the squalling infant in her arms, all the pain faded into insignificance. "He is perfect," Isaac whispered, tears running down his face as he looked at his son. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names but never quite settled on one. Lena looked at her baby, at his red face and tiny fists, and said, "James, James Parker, after my father." "James," Isaac repeated. "I like it. Hello, James. Welcome to the world." Raising a baby while running a ranch was exhausting, but Lena would not have traded it for anything. She loved being a mother, loved watching James grow and change, loved seeing Isaac's gentleness with their son. Isaac was a wonderful father, patient and playful, and seeing him with James made Lena fall in love with him all over again. The years passed in a pattern of seasons and milestones. James took his first steps, spoke his first words, grew from a baby into a curious, energetic toddler. The ranch prospered, allowing them to build an addition onto the house and increase their herd. They became fixtures in the Hot Springs community, respected and well-liked, their story of overcoming pride and finding love becoming almost legendary in the small town. When James was 3, Lena became pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, her body knowing what to expect. Their daughter was born in autumn, during the harvest season, with none of the drama of James's birth. She came into the world easily, and when Lena held her for the first time, she marveled at how different this felt from the first time, more confident and less terrified. "What about Emma?" Isaac suggested. "Emma Parker." Lena smiled. "Emma is perfect." With 2 young children, life became even busier, but Lena had help now. They hired a young woman from town to assist with the household chores, and neighbors were generous about watching the children when needed. Lena had learned, finally, to accept help when it was offered, to admit she could not do everything alone. The lesson had taken years to truly sink in, but it had. She thought sometimes about the woman she had been when she first arrived in Hot Springs, so determined to need no one, so afraid that accepting help meant weakness. She understood now that real strength was knowing when to ask for help, knowing when to let people in. Isaac had taught her that, through his patient, wordless assistance that had never asked for anything in return. One evening, when Emma was about 6 months old and James was playing with blocks on the floor, Isaac and Lena sat on their porch watching the sunset. It had become their ritual, this quiet time together at the end of the day. "Do you ever think about that first day?" Lena asked. "When I drove into town." "All the time," Isaac admitted. "I remember thinking you were the stubbornest, most beautiful woman I had ever seen. I remember wanting to help you and knowing you would refuse. I remember deciding to help anyway. I was so angry at first. Every time I found food in the hayloft or discovered you had paid for something, I wanted to march over and tell you to stop. Why did you not?" "Because deep down, I knew I needed the help. And because you never made me feel weak for needing it. You just quietly took care of things and never asked for acknowledgement or payment." Isaac took her hand, their fingers intertwining in the familiar, comfortable way of long marriage. "I fell in love with your strength, Lena, but I also saw that your strength was going to break you if you did not let someone share the burden. I wanted to be that someone." "You saved me," Lena said softly. "I was drowning and I did not even realize it." I thought I was being strong, but I was really just scared and alone. You showed me there was another way." "We saved each other," Isaac corrected. "You taught me that it is okay to care, to get involved, to put yourself out there even if you might get hurt. Before you, I was just going through the motions of life. You gave me purpose." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sky turn from gold to pink to purple. Inside the house, they could hear Emma starting to fuss, needing to be fed. James called out for his mother, wanting help with something. "Our life is chaotic," Lena said, standing up. "It is perfect," Isaac countered, standing with her. "It is everything I ever wanted." They walked inside together, into the warm, noisy, wonderful chaos of their family. The house was small but filled with love. The work was hard but meaningful. The future was uncertain but bright with possibility. Years continued to pass, each bringing its own joys and challenges. James grew into a responsible young boy who loved the ranch and the animals. Emma was sweet and creative, always drawing pictures or making up songs. When James was 8 and Emma was 5, Lena gave birth to twin boys, Michael and Matthew, who brought twice the work and twice the joy. The ranch expanded over the years. Isaac bought adjoining land when it became available, and they built a bigger house to accommodate their growing family. They hired ranch hands to help with the work, and the business thrived. Lena's garden grew larger each year, providing vegetables for their table and extras to sell in town. She raised chickens and preserved food and managed the household with efficient grace. But more than the material success, what mattered was the love that infused every aspect of their lives. Isaac never stopped helping Lena without being asked, anticipating her needs and quietly meeting them. And Lena had learned to ask for help when she needed it, to accept assistance without pride getting in the way, to appreciate the strength that came from partnership rather than solitary struggle. They celebrated their 10th wedding anniversary with a party at the ranch, inviting everyone who had been part of their journey. Mrs. Patterson came, older now but still sharp and kind. Tommy from the livery came with his new wife. Margaret and her husband from the general store came, along with half the town. The house and yard were filled with laughter and music, and the sounds of children playing. As Lena looked around at the life they had built, at the family and friends who surrounded them, she felt overwhelming gratitude. She thought about the angry, grieving, stubborn woman who had driven into Hot Springs 10 years ago, refusing to ask for help, determined to handle everything alone. That woman had been strong, but she had also been brittle, on the verge of breaking. The woman she was now was stronger in ways that mattered more. She knew how to bend without breaking, how to accept help without feeling diminished, how to love deeply without fear of loss destroying her. Isaac had taught her that, through years of patient, wordless care that had eventually grown into a partnership of equals. "What are you thinking about?" Isaac asked, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "About how different my life is from what I imagined 10 years ago," Lena said. "About how lucky I am." "We are lucky," Isaac corrected, kissing the side of her neck. "Both of us." The party continued late into the night, and when everyone finally left and the children were in bed, Isaac and Lena stood on their porch in the familiar ritual of watching the night sky. "I love you," Lena said, leaning into her husband's warmth. "I love you too," Isaac replied. "Today, tomorrow, always." They stayed there for a long time, two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built a life together through hard work and patience and love. The future stretched before them, full of unknown challenges and joys, but they would face it together as they faced everything. More years passed, bringing the inevitable changes that time brings. The children grew up, each finding their own paths. James stayed on the ranch, loving the work as much as his father did, eventually taking over more of the daily operations. Emma married a kind man from a neighboring town and moved away, though she visited often with her own children. The twins, Michael and Matthew, were inseparable, and they decided together to start a horse breeding business on a corner of the ranch land. Isaac and Lena grew older, their hair turning gray, their bodies moving a bit slower, but their love never diminished. If anything, it deepened with the years, growing richer and more complex. They had weathered hard times together, bad winters that killed cattle, droughts that threatened crops, illnesses that scared them. But they had always come through together, supporting each other, the partnership they had built proving unshakable. On their 30th anniversary, their children threw them a surprise party. The ranch was filled with family and friends, 3 generations gathered to celebrate. There were grandchildren running around, the oldest already 12, the youngest still a baby. There was food and music and dancing, and at one point, someone asked Isaac to tell the story of how he and Lena had met. Isaac looked at his wife, seeking permission. Lena nodded, smiling. She no longer felt shame about those early days, about her stubborn pride and refusal to ask for help. It was part of their story, part of who they had been and who they had become. I saw Lena drive into Hot Springs on the hottest day of summer in 1882. Isaac began, and the gathered crowd grew quiet, listening. She was hauling her father's body in a wagon, and she looked like she had not slept or eaten properly in days. But she held her head high and she refused to ask anyone for help. She was the most stubborn, most beautiful woman I had ever seen, and I fell in love with her right then and there. "That is not love, that is insanity," James joked, and everyone laughed. "Maybe a bit of both," Isaac admitted. But I saw she needed help, and I knew she would not ask, so I decided to help anyway without saying a word about it. I left food where she would find it. I took care of things that needed doing. I never asked for thanks or acknowledgement, I just helped. "Why?" Emma's oldest daughter asked. "Why would you help someone who did not want help?" Isaac looked at Lena, and the love in his eyes made her chest tighten. "Because sometimes the strongest people are the ones who need help the most. Because being strong enough to ask for help is hard, but being strong enough to accept help you did not ask for is even harder. And because I wanted to show her that accepting help did not make her weak, it made her human." Lena stood up and went to her husband, taking his hand. "Isaac showed me that I did not have to do everything alone," she said to the gathered crowd. "He taught me that partnership is not about losing independence. It is about choosing to build something together that is stronger than what either person could build alone. He taught me that love is not about grand gestures or pretty words. It is about showing up every day and helping without being asked, about noticing what is needed and providing it, about caring enough to act even when it is not convenient." "That is the most romantic thing I have ever heard," Margaret's granddaughter sighed. "It is the truth," Lena said simply. "Isaac saved my life by refusing to let me struggle alone, and I like to think I saved his by giving him someone to care for, someone to build a life with. We saved each other." The party continued, and as the sun set, Isaac and Lena found themselves on their porch once again, watching the sky change colors. It was their place, their ritual, maintained over 30 years of marriage. "I would do it all again," Isaac said suddenly. "Every moment, every choice. I would drive into town and see you and fall in love and spend months leaving food in a hayloft. I would do it all exactly the same." "So would I," Lena agreed. "Even the hard parts, even the grief and fear and struggle, because it all led to this, to us, to the life we built together." They sat there as the stars came out. Two people who had found each other when both needed it most, who had built a love story not on dramatic gestures but on quiet, consistent care. Their story was not the stuff of dime novels or dramatic ballads. It was simpler and truer than that, a story of stubbornness meeting patience, of pride learning to bend, of two wounded souls finding healing in partnership. As the night deepened and the air grew cool, they went inside to the house full of family and love. Their children and grandchildren were scattered throughout the rooms, the noise and chaos a testament to the life they had built. Lena looked at Isaac, and he looked back, and no words were needed. They never had been, really. From the very beginning, Isaac had shown his love through actions, not words. And Lena had finally learned to accept that love, to return it, to build a life on it. The years continued their inevitable march. Isaac and Lena eventually stepped fully back from running the ranch, letting James take over while they enjoyed their grandchildren and the slower pace of retirement. They traveled a bit, visiting Emma and her family, taking trips to see parts of the country they had never seen. But they always came back to Hot Springs, to the ranch, to the home they had built. They grew old together, their bodies weakening but their love remaining strong. On their 50th anniversary, the whole town threw them a celebration. Hot Springs had grown over the decades, but it remained a close-knit community, and Isaac and Lena were beloved figures, their story of love and partnership inspiring to everyone who knew them. At the party, surrounded by their 4 children, numerous grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren, Isaac gave a toast. His hand shook slightly as he raised his glass, but his voice was strong. 50 years ago, I married the love of my life, he said. People often ask me what the secret to a long marriage is, and my answer is simple. Marry someone stubborn. Marry someone strong. Marry someone who challenges you to be better. And then spend every day showing them, through your actions, that you love them. Do not wait for them to ask for help. Just help. Do not wait for the perfect moment to show you care. Just show it. Love is not complicated. It is just consistent, daily choosing to care for someone else as much as you care for yourself. Lena stood and kissed her husband, tears streaming down her face. You have been choosing me every day for 50 years, she said. And I have been choosing you. Thank you for seeing me when I was lost, for helping me when I was too proud to ask, for loving me even when I did not know how to accept love. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. The room erupted in applause and cheers, and the party continued late into the night. But eventually, things quieted and guests left, and children took grandchildren home to bed. Isaac and Lena found themselves alone on their porch once more, in the place where they had spent so many evenings over the decades. You remember the first time we kissed? Lena asked. On this very porch, Isaac said. You were wearing your blue dress and the sunset was painting the sky orange and purple. You asked permission first. Of course I did. You would have knocked me flat if I had not. Lena laughed, the sound warm and rich. Probably true. I was still very prickly back then. You were perfect back then. You are perfect now. They sat in comfortable silence, hands intertwined, watching the stars. They had sat like this thousands of times over the years, and each time felt both familiar and precious. This was their marriage distilled to its essence: quiet companionship, comfortable silence, the knowledge that they did not need words because their actions had spoken clearly for 50 years. Isaac died peacefully in his sleep 5 years later, his hand in Lena's. He was 82 years old, and he had lived a good, full life. Lena grieved deeply, the loss cutting through her like a knife, but she did not break. The strength Isaac had helped her build over their decades together held her up. She had her children and grandchildren surrounding her, and she let them help, let them take care of her, accepting their assistance without pride getting in the way. She lived another 7 years after Isaac's death. Years filled with family and memories, and the quiet satisfaction of a life well lived. She told her grandchildren and great-grandchildren stories about Isaac, about the cowboy who had helped her without saying a word, who had shown her through actions that love was about consistent care and quiet support. When Lena died at the age of 89, she was buried beside Isaac on the hill overlooking the ranch they had built together. Her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren gathered to say goodbye, and they told stories about her strength, her stubbornness, her capacity for love. They told the story of how she had driven into hot springs alone and grieving, refusing to ask for help. They told how Isaac had helped anyway, wordlessly caring for her until she learned to accept care. They told how that beginning had led to a love story that spanned more than half a century. The ranch continued to thrive under James's care, and eventually under his children's care. The house that Isaac had built with his own hands remained standing, occupied now by the fourth generation of Parkers. And on summer evenings, when the sun set in brilliant colors over the South Dakota hills, family members would often gather on the old porch and tell stories about Isaac and Lena, about the stubborn woman and the patient cowboy who had found each other against all odds. Their love story became part of the town's history, a reminder that the strongest love is not always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it is quiet and consistent, shown through actions rather than words, built on a foundation of caring enough to help even when help is not requested, of being strong enough to accept help even when pride says to refuse. In Hot Springs, South Dakota, more than a century after Lena first drove her wagon down the dusty Main Street, people still tell the story. They tell it to their children and grandchildren, passing down the lesson that real love is patient and kind and shows itself through daily acts of care. They tell about the woman who refused to ask anyone for help, and the cowboy who helped her anyway without saying a word, and how that silent kindness grew into a love that lasted a lifetime and echoed through generations. And on warm summer evenings, when the light is just right and the wind whispers through the prairie grass, some people swear they can still see two figures sitting on an old porch, watching the sunset together, hands intertwined, no words needed because their love speaks louder than any words ever could. It is just a story, of course, a romantic notion. But like all the best stories, it carries a truth at its heart that love endures, that kindness matters, that sometimes the most profound connections are built not on grand gestures but on small, consistent acts of care. The Parker Ranch still stands, a thriving operation now in its fifth generation. The house has been expanded and updated, but the original structure remains, carefully preserved. And on the porch, in a place of honor, hangs a plaque that reads, "Built by Isaac Parker, 1883. Filled with love by Isaac and Lena, 1883-1937. May all who enter know the strength that comes from helping without being asked and accepting help without shame." It is a legacy of love, of partnership, of two stubborn people who learned to bend toward each other, and in doing so created something beautiful and lasting. It is a reminder that the Wild West was not just about gunfights and outlaws and frontier justice. It was also about ordinary people finding extraordinary love, about building families and communities, about learning that true strength comes not from refusing help, but from having the courage to accept it and the wisdom to offer it. And so the story lives on, passed from generation to generation, a testament to a love that began with silence and grew into something that would be talked about for more than a century. Lena, who refused to ask anyone for help, and Isaac, who helped her anyway without saying a word. Their story is a reminder that sometimes the most powerful love stories are not about what is said, but about what is done. About showing up, day after day, year after year, choosing to care, choosing to help, choosing to love through actions that speak louder than any words ever could.